Ethan Caldwell's reckless dare to marry a woman he barely knows spirals into a heart-wrenching secret that flips his world upside down. Will he survive the truth? Ethan Caldwell had it all. At 38, he was at the top of his game, founder of a booming tech empire, a penthouse in San Francisco that screamed luxury, and a charm that could captivate anyone. Yet, in the midst of it all, he was bored. The glittering parties, the beautiful women, and the expensive cars, it all felt too easy. He thrived on challenges, and his best friend Marcus knew it. One evening, at a swanky gala with champagne flowing, Marcus leaned over and said, "I've got a dare for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "I'm listening." "Marry a woman who's not your type. Someone plain, someone ordinary. Stay married for 6 months, and I'll pay you $2 million. Ethan chuckled. He loved a good challenge. "And if I win?" Marcus grinned. "I'll pay you." It was almost too simple. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. He was confident that no woman could resist his charm. "Let's deal," he said, sealing the deal with a firm handshake. But as Marcus walked away, a small voice whispered that this game might not be as easy as he thought. Marcus's choice was Olivia Bennett, a 34-year-old community organizer who wasn't impressed by wealth or status. Ethan was intrigued by her stubbornness. She wasn't like the women he usually went after. Her file painted her as smart, independent, and proud. This would be fun, he thought. He could charm her, win the bet, and walk away richer. Their first meeting was set at a rooftop restaurant. As Ethan stood, waiting for her arrival, he mentally rehearsed his usual charming greetings. But when Olivia walked in, he felt a shift. She wasn't dazzled by the view, nor did she even seem to notice Ethan's confident smile. She wasn't here to be charmed. "I know about the dare," she said, locking eyes with him as she approached the table. "And I'm here to teach you a lesson." Ethan's grin faltered. This wasn't going to be as easy as he thought. Olivia's confidence was palpable, and for the first time in a long while, he found himself off balance. Their conversation was sharp, filled with sarcastic jabs and probing questions. But there was one thing Ethan knew for sure, that this was no ordinary woman, and she wasn't going to be won over by his usual tricks. Ethan wasn't worried. After all, he was a master of control, and Olivia Bennett was just another puzzle to crack. He had faced much tougher challenges in boardrooms and negotiating tables. How hard could this be? He would charm her, tick off the 6 months, collect the $2 million, and move on to the next conquest. But something about Olivia unsettled him. It wasn't just her resistance, it was her sheer indifference to his wealth. The other women he encountered either drooled over him or saw him as a means to an end. But Olivia was different. She wasn't impressed, and that only fueled Ethan's desire to win. Their second meeting was set at a cozy coffee shop in a quiet corner of the city, nowhere near the luxury of the places Ethan usually frequented. He barely knew how to act in a setting like this, and yet Olivia seemed right at home, sipping her latte as if she owned the entire room. "You know," she said, setting down her cup with a delicate clink, "I don't care about your money, your fancy life, or anything else you think you can impress me with. This is just business." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "Business? What do you mean?" She fixed him with a hard stare, her expression unreadable. "I'm here for one thing, my dignity, and I'm not playing by your rules." Ethan raised an eyebrow, amused. "What do you want from this, then?" "Respect," she said flatly. "You think you can control me, but you're wrong. I'm not here to be your trophy wife or your plaything. I'm just here to make sure you learn a lesson." Ethan felt a stir of something deep within him, something he couldn't quite place. He wasn't used to women being so straightforward with him, and it made him feel uneasy. Olivia continued, her eyes narrowing. "This whole thing, This marriage, it's temporary. I keep my job, my friends, and my freedom. You don't get to change that." For a moment, Ethan said nothing, letting the weight of her words sink in. He had expected a little resistance, but this was something else entirely. A challenge, yes, but not one he'd ever faced before. A woman who didn't want his money, didn't need his status, and didn't care about his charms. It was almost refreshing. "Well then," Ethan said, leaning forward with a sly smile. "I guess we're in agreement. 6 months, no strings." "I can live with that." He extended his hand, and Olivia hesitated for just a beat before shaking it firmly. The deal was sealed. But even as they finalized the terms, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Olivia had an agenda, he just didn't know what it was yet. And that made the stakes higher than he had originally imagined. As they left the coffee shop, Olivia's gaze never wavered. She was determined, no doubt, but Ethan wasn't about to let her win. He had his own plans, and he wasn't about to lose. The first few days of their marriage passed with minimal drama, just the paperwork, the small talk, and the absence of any true emotional connection. Ethan was convinced that she was playing a part, just like everyone else. But as he continued to push, he realized Olivia wasn't like the others. She wasn't playing a part. It seemed she was in control. He was not ready to lose, so he decided to go all in, shower her with gifts, take her on extravagant trips, flood her with attention. Surely, a woman like Olivia, who was so different from the gold diggers he was used to, would appreciate the effort. And even if she didn't, the money and luxury would win her over. It had to. One evening, he arrived at their Palo Alto mansion, ready to impress. He handed her a small velvet box. She opened it, revealing a delicate diamond necklace that sparkled under the chandelier. "For you," he said, his voice smooth, his grin wide. "I thought you might like it." She stared at the necklace for a long moment, unblinking. Then, without a word, she tossed it back at him. "I'm not your doll, Ethan. Keep your things. I don't need them." The words stung more than he expected. Ethan Caldwell, the king of control, the man who could charm anyone, was being rejected by a woman who had nothing to offer him but contempt. But he wasn't going to let it slide. He wasn't the kind of man to back down, especially not to someone like her. A new plan formed in his mind. If Olivia didn't care about his money, if she didn't care about his gifts, then he would hit her where it hurt the most. Ethan was used to getting what he wanted, and if she wasn't going to bend to his will, he would make her. He started small, canceling her meetings, rearranging her schedule so that she'd miss important events. He made sure she'd be stuck at the mansion, waiting for her own life to slip through her fingers. "You don't need to work," he told her one night, voice dripping with condescension. "You're married now. I can take care of everything." Olivia didn't flinch. "You don't get to decide that," she snapped. Her voice was sharp, and for a moment, it reminded Ethan of the fire he'd first seen in her eyes. She wasn't going to let him control her, and that made him more determined to break her. It wasn't just the work that irked him. It was her unyielding nature. Every time he tried to boast about his latest deal, she called him out on it. She knew exactly how much money he made and how little of it he paid in taxes. For the first time in his life, someone had the power to make him feel small. One night, as they sat at the dinner table, Ethan tried a softer approach, hoping to appeal to her emotions. "Why do you hate me, Olivia?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "This life, it's a dream. You've got everything you could want." Her eyes met his, and she leaned in, her voice low but filled with conviction. "You're empty, Ethan. All this money, and you've got nothing real. It's all fake. Your life, your empire. You have nothing that actually matters." Her words hit him like a punch to the gut. Ethan had never been challenged like this before, not by anyone. No one had ever questioned the validity of his wealth or the life he'd built. Olivia had a way of making him feel like a fraud, and for the first time, Ethan didn't know how to respond. His heart raced as he sat there, stunned. She was right. He had everything: money, power, influence, but nothing real, nothing that filled him up, nothing that gave his life meaning. And it was in that moment, as Olivia's gaze never wavered from his, that he realized something important. She was changing him. Whether she meant to or not, Olivia was making him question the very foundation of his existence. And that scared him more than he cared to admit. 3 months into the marriage, Ethan was losing control, and he hated it. Every move he made to break Olivia, to get under her skin, was met with resistance. She was a wall he couldn't climb, no matter how hard he tried. At first, he thought it was just a matter of time before she'd give in. After all, who could resist him forever? But Olivia wasn't like other women. She wasn't swayed by his wealth, his charm, or his attempts to manipulate her life. She stood firm, and the harder he pushed, the more she pushed back. Ethan had tried everything: gifts, trips, kindness, cruelty, you name it. Yet, every attempt was met with indifference or defiance. He began to feel like he was losing his grip. The power he had so easily commanded in his professional life seemed useless here. Olivia was invulnerable to him, and it was starting to drive him mad. One evening, after a particularly frustrating dinner where Olivia had once again called him out on his hypocrisy, Ethan snapped. He couldn't take it anymore. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor as he towered over her. "What do you want from me, Olivia? What is this all about?" His voice was sharp, the tension in the room thick. Olivia didn't flinch. She simply met his gaze, her expression unreadable, and stood slowly. When she spoke, her voice was calm, but it carried a weight that sent a shiver down his spine. "You think this is about you?" she said quietly. "I'm here for me, Ethan, and I'm not breaking." For a moment, there was silence between them, a silence that was heavier than any words could be. Ethan's mind raced. In the days that followed, Ethan tried to find out more about Olivia's past, searching for a weakness, something he could use against her. He hired a private investigator to dig into her background. What he uncovered was baffling. There was nothing. Olivia's history seemed nearly spotless. There were no scandals, no secrets, nothing for him to exploit. She had no apparent ties to anyone who could hurt him, no debts, no personal enemies. It was as though she existed outside of the world he knew. The more Ethan learned, the more unsettled he became. Olivia wasn't just stubborn, she was calculating. Every move she made was deliberate, and it made Ethan wonder if he was being outplayed. He was supposed to be the one pulling the strings, but it felt like he was the puppet. Then, one evening, when he least expected it, Olivia dropped a bombshell that shook him to his core. "You're not as smart as you think," she said, her voice low and almost teasing as she leaned against the kitchen counter. "I've got plans you'll never see coming." Ethan froze. Her words echoed in his mind. Plans? What did she mean by that? Had he been so focused on his own game that he hadn't seen the bigger picture? He had no idea what she was referring to, but the look in her eyes told him that she was holding something back, something huge. For the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't know what to do next. The final month of the bet loomed closer, and Ethan found himself obsessed with Olivia. She was no longer just a challenge to be conquered. She was something else, something he couldn't explain. The walls he'd built around himself were crumbling, piece by piece. and every time he tried to rebuild them, Olivia knocked them down without even trying. One evening, after a particularly tense argument about one of his latest business ventures, Ethan found himself standing on the terrace, staring out at the city below. The lights of San Francisco twinkled in the distance, but all he could focus on was the woman who had made him question everything he thought he knew about himself. The thought of giving up seemed impossible. Olivia had a hold on him now, something deeper than any game or dare. Olivia came outside, her footsteps soft on the marble floor. She stood beside him, her gaze on the horizon. For a long moment, they stood in silence, neither of them willing to break the quiet that had settled between them. Finally, Olivia spoke, her voice low, almost hesitant. "You want the truth, Ethan?" she asked. He turned to face her, his heart racing. "What do you mean?" She took a deep breath, her eyes flickering with something he couldn't quite place, maybe pain or regret. "You destroyed my family," she said, her words cutting through the night air like a knife. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What?" "No, that's not possible." Her eyes met his, and for the first time since they'd met, Ethan saw the raw emotion in her gaze. There was no mask, just pure pain. 10 years ago, she continued, her voice trembling with suppressed emotion, you crushed my brother's company, Bennett Innovations. He lost everything because of you. His dreams, his hope, all gone. And then he drank himself to death. Ethan's mind reeled. He had heard of Bennett Innovations, an up-and-coming tech company that had folded just after a deal went sour. He hadn't paid much attention at the time. It was just another casualty in the ruthless world of business. But hearing Olivia's words, seeing the tears well up in her eyes, made him feel like he had just been punched in the gut. "I didn't know," Ethan stammered, his voice low with guilt. "I didn't know it was your brother. I swear, I didn't know." Olivia's gaze hardened. "Of course you didn't. You didn't care. You just took the deal, walked away, and moved on to the next one. But we didn't. We were left picking up the pieces of a life shattered by your greed. My family was destroyed by your actions, Ethan." Her words hit him harder than anything he'd experienced before. All this time, he had believed that his business decisions were just that, cold and calculated. He had never once stopped to consider the people behind those decisions, the lives affected by the choices he made in boardrooms and conference calls. But now, standing in front of him, was the living, breathing consequence of those choices. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wanted to say more, wanted to explain, to justify, but he couldn't. He couldn't undo the damage he had done. Olivia wiped away a tear, her expression unreadable. "Sorry doesn't bring my brother back, Ethan. It doesn't fix the mess you've made. But I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why I agreed to this bet." Ethan's chest tightened, and for the first time in his life, he felt the crushing weight of guilt. He had spent years building an empire, accumulating wealth and power, but it had all been hollow. He had ignored the people who had fallen by the wayside, the ones who had paid the price for his success. And now, standing in front of him, was the woman who had lost everything because of him. The realization was devastating. "Can you forgive me?" he asked, his voice trembling with a vulnerability he had never allowed anyone to see. Olivia looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with pain. "I don't know if I can," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But maybe, just maybe, I can try." Ethan didn't know what to say. He didn't know if he deserved forgiveness, or if Olivia would ever be able to truly let go of the past. But in that moment, something shifted between them. The anger, the bitterness was still there, but so was the possibility of healing. Olivia's words haunted Ethan long after their conversation on the terrace. He tried to bury the guilt. to focus on work, to throw himself back into the world he knew so well. But every time he thought about it, about her brother's death, and the role he had played in it, the weight grew heavier. Olivia had given him the truth, and now there was nothing he could do but sit with it. The silence between them grew. Olivia barely spoke to him, barely looked at him. At breakfast, she'd smile politely at the staff but ignore him completely. It was like he wasn't even there. She would sit in the same room as him but never once engage in conversation, and when she did speak, it was cold. A casual "good morning" or "I'm going out," but never anything personal. Ethan, who had always been in control of every situation, was now left powerless. The house that once felt like a luxurious haven now felt like a prison. His empire was falling apart in front of him, and the woman who had the power to destroy him was doing it without lifting a finger. And yet, he couldn't blame her. Not really. He had done this to himself. Work, too, was slipping through his fingers. Deals he once could count on were falling apart. People were canceling meetings with him, whispering about his behavior, his personal life. The once untouchable Ethan Caldwell now seemed like a man on the edge, and it was all because of Olivia's quiet rebellion. She wasn't just punishing him emotionally, she was playing a more subtle game that was affecting his business as well. One night, after another failed meeting, Ethan walked into their bedroom to find Olivia sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the city. The silence between them had stretched for so long, it almost felt unbearable. He had tried everything to break the quiet, but nothing worked. He stood in the doorway, watching her, feeling a mixture of guilt and frustration. "Olivia," he said, his voice soft, "you're killing me." She didn't look at him. "I'm not doing anything, Ethan. You're doing this to yourself." Her words were like a slap to the face. Ethan clenched his fists, the guilt rising within him again. "My business is falling apart. My life is falling apart, and you're standing there, watching it happen." Olivia finally turned her head, her gaze calm but unyielding. "Good," she said simply. "Maybe now you'll feel the same way I felt when you destroyed my brother. Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to lose everything." The coldness in her voice cut through him, but he couldn't argue with her. She was right. He had built his empire on the backs of others, never once stopping to consider the consequences. Now it was his turn to pay. He sank down on the bed beside her, his head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice shaking. I didn't know how much it hurt." Olivia's eyes softened just for a moment. "It doesn't matter now. The damage is done. We can't change the past." She stood up, her back to him, her voice distant. "You need to figure out what kind of person you want to be, Ethan. I'm done waiting for you to figure it out. I'm not going to wait for you to fix everything. You have to do that on your own." With that, she left the room, leaving Ethan alone with his thoughts. The silence in the house was suffocating. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't know what to do next. Days passed in a blur. Ethan tried to salvage his business, but it was like fighting an invisible enemy. Every time he thought he had control, something slipped away. He knew Olivia was behind it. She had never directly interfered, but her presence, or rather, her absence was enough. She had found a way to hurt him without lifting a finger, and it was working. But it wasn't just his business that was unraveling. It was his sense of self. Ethan had always prided himself on being in control, on being the one who called the shots. But now, he was powerless. Olivia had shown him just how fragile his life really was. The money, the power, the control, it had all been a facade. None of it mattered when you lost the only thing that could give your life meaning: integrity. Ethan knew he had to change. He had to make things right, not just with Olivia, but with himself. He had spent too many years building an empire on broken foundations, and now it was time to rebuild. But how? Where did he even begin? One night, after days of contemplation, he sat down at his desk and made a list. He started with the people he had hurt, the ones he had crushed in his climb to the top. He had to find them, apologize, and make things right. He didn't know if it would be enough, but it was the only place to start. Ethan wasn't sure if Olivia would ever forgive him. He didn't know if he could ever make up for the destruction he had caused. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to stop trying. The silent punishment Olivia had inflicted on him had broken him, but it had also opened his eyes. It was time to face the truth of who he was and who he could still become. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to change. The days following Olivia's withdrawal felt like weeks to Ethan. His business was in disarray, but the true cost of his actions wasn't just monetary. It was the emotional toll it was taking on him. He thought back to the words Olivia had spoken. Maybe now you'll understand what it's like to lose everything. He had never truly understood the weight of her words until now. He had lost his sense of self, his drive, and his purpose. And Olivia had been right to strip that away from him. But he wasn't going to give up. He knew he had a long road ahead of him, and he wasn't sure if he could ever make things right with Olivia, but he had to try. This wasn't just about her forgiveness. It was about him changing, becoming someone better. A man who could be proud of his actions, who could look in the mirror without feeling disgusted by what he saw. He began small, doing things that were entirely out of character for him. He'd leave Olivia tea in the kitchen, without any notes or grand gestures, just a simple act of kindness. He'd cook dinner, something simple, just to show he could. It wasn't about trying to win her back. It was about showing her that he was changing, even if it took time. Slowly, he began to notice the slightest shift in Olivia's demeanor. She didn't glare at him as much, and when he left her tea, she started drinking it. No words, but a small acknowledgement. It was a small victory, but to Ethan, it felt like a huge step forward. Every little thing he did for her was a step toward rebuilding the bridge that had been burned. He knew it wasn't enough, but it was a start. One rainy evening, after Ethan had spent hours trying to salvage a deal that seemed destined to fail, he found himself in the living room, alone with his thoughts. He wasn't used to feeling this vulnerable. As he sat on the couch, Olivia walked in, holding a book in her hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She sat beside him, placing the book down on the coffee table. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice softer than he'd heard it in weeks. "For the tea." Ethan looked at her, a lump forming in his throat. "You're welcome." For the first time in what felt like forever, they shared a moment of peace. It wasn't a breakthrough, but it was a crack in the wall that had been built between them. Olivia wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't pushing him away. It was a small change, but it meant everything to Ethan. He wasn't sure if it meant she was ready to forgive him, but it was a sign that she might be willing to try. As the rain continued to fall outside, Ethan sat in the silence with her. He didn't need her forgiveness right away. What mattered was that he was trying to change. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. "Why keep trying?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She wasn't looking at him, but he could hear the uncertainty in her tone. Ethan exhaled, his mind racing for the right words. "Because I'm not the guy I was," he said, his voice raw. "I want to be better. For you, for me, for everyone I've hurt." Olivia didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, her fingers drumming softly on the edge of the book. Ethan held his breath, waiting. He wasn't expecting her to jump into his arms and declare her love, but he wanted something, anything that would tell him he wasn't fighting this battle alone. Finally, she looked at him, her eyes softening just a little. "I don't know if I can trust you yet, Ethan, but I see that you're trying, and that's something." It wasn't much, but it was more than he had hoped for. He smiled, a real, genuine smile, as the weight on his chest lifted just a little. This wasn't the end of the story, but it was a step in the right direction. Ethan wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in months, he felt like he was heading in the right direction. As the days stretched on, Ethan continued his quiet attempts at change. Every day felt like a test, an emotional endurance exercise where he was forced to confront the person he had been and the person he wanted to become. Olivia had started to soften, just a little. She still didn't engage with him fully, but the tension between them had lessened. She would join him for meals, and sometimes they would talk about trivial things, books, movies, even the weather. But the quiet between them was still there. One evening, Ethan found himself sitting in their living room, a glass of whiskey in hand. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but the ache in his chest was unbearable. His business was on the mend, but it still wasn't the same. He wasn't the same. He couldn't help but think about Olivia and the years of emotional damage he had caused her. Every time he thought about her brother, every time he remembered what he had done, the guilt came rushing back like a tidal wave. That night, as he stared out the window at the city, Olivia came into the room. She was quieter than usual, her eyes distant. Ethan put down his glass, feeling a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they were finally ready to talk about everything, the things that had been left unsaid for so long. "You know," she began, her voice soft, almost hesitant, "there's more to the story than you know." Ethan turned to look at her, his heart beating faster. She sat down across from him, the silence between them stretching as she gathered her thoughts. "When my brother died," she said, her voice breaking, "I was engaged. We were planning a future together. But when he lost everything, when you took everything, everything fell apart." She paused, and Ethan could see the pain in her eyes. "I couldn't deal with it. I blamed you for everything. I didn't just lose him. I lost the man I was supposed to spend my life with. The grief tore us apart." Ethan's chest tightened as the weight of her words settled over him. This wasn't just about her brother's company, or the betrayal of a business deal gone wrong. This was about love, the kind of love that Olivia had lost in the wake of Ethan's actions. "I didn't just lose a brother," she continued, her voice faltering. "I lost the future I had dreamed of. I blamed you for everything. And for a long time, I told myself that I was going to make you feel that loss too. I thought that if I hurt you, if I made you feel as empty as I felt, that maybe, just maybe, I could start healing." Ethan sat frozen, his heart breaking with every word she spoke. He had never realized the depth of the pain he had caused. He had thought his business decisions were just part of the game. But Olivia's words were a reminder that there were real people on the other side of those decisions. People with dreams, with families, with futures. "I wanted you to hurt," Olivia said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted you to feel the way I felt when I lost him. But now I see you're trying. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, but I think maybe I can try." Ethan swallowed hard, the lump in his throat threatening to choke him. He had spent so many years building his empire, ignoring the lives he had trampled over, thinking that success was the only thing that mattered. But now, in this quiet moment with Olivia, he saw just how wrong he had been. He had lost sight of everything that truly mattered: family, love, human connection. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice shaking. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I never meant to hurt you, Olivia. I didn't know. I didn't see how much I was hurting people. But I do now. And I'm sorry. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right." Olivia didn't respond immediately. She sat there, her eyes filled with tears. She took a deep breath, as though considering his words, and then finally spoke. "You can't change the past, Ethan," she said. "But you can change the future. I don't know if we'll ever get back to where we were before, but I see that you're trying. And that's a start." And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope. The weeks following that conversation marked a new chapter in Ethan and Olivia's complicated story. Ethan spent his days trying to rebuild his business from the ground up. But, unlike before, he wasn't motivated by power or money. This time, his actions were driven by a deeper need to atone for his past mistakes. He began reaching out to the people he had hurt, starting with those who had been affected by his ruthless business tactics. One by one, he offered apologies and, where possible, restitution. It wasn't easy, and the reactions varied, from skepticism to outright rejection. But with every conversation, Ethan felt like he was shedding pieces of the man he had once been, slowly transforming into someone who could hold his head up with pride. Olivia, for her part, didn't make things easy for him. She was still distant, still wary, and still uncertain. Her words about forgiveness lingered in the air like an unspoken challenge. Ethan knew she wasn't expecting him to fix everything overnight, but he also knew she was watching. She was waiting for him to prove that his efforts weren't just empty gestures. In the evenings, when he returned to the house, Olivia would be there, but she kept her distance. At first, Ethan wasn't sure how to handle it. The old Ethan would have pushed for her attention, for some sign that his attempts were being recognized. But this time, he held back. He focused on the small acts of kindness, like making her favorite chamomile tea without a word, or tidying up the kitchen after dinner, hoping that through these quiet actions, Olivia might see that he was changing. One evening, as the sky darkened and the air grew cooler, Ethan sat on the terrace, deep in thought. The city lights twinkled below, but his mind wasn't on the view. He was reflecting on everything he had done, everything he had to do to fix the mess he'd created. It was a difficult journey, more difficult than any business deal he had ever negotiated. Olivia stepped out onto the terrace, the soft click of the door behind her signaling her presence. She didn't say anything at first, simply stood next to him, her arms folded across her chest. Ethan didn't force the conversation. He didn't try to fill the silence with words. They stood there, together, sharing the quiet. After a long pause, Olivia spoke, her voice steady but soft. "I see the changes, Ethan. I see that you're trying, but I'm not sure it's enough yet." Ethan nodded, fully understanding. "I know," he replied quietly, "and I don't expect it to be, but I'm not going to stop trying. I don't want to be the man I was." Olivia's eyes met his, and for the first time in weeks, Ethan saw a flicker of something different in her expression. It wasn't warmth, but it wasn't coldness either. It was something more neutral, something that felt like a bridge, slowly being built between them. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said, her voice calmer now. "I just want to see consistency. I want to know that this isn't just a phase for you, that this change is real. I can't promise that I'll be perfect, Olivia, but I can promise that I'll keep working at it. I'll keep being better." She didn't say anything more, but for the first time, she didn't walk away. She stayed by his side, silent but present. And that to Ethan, was enough. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Ethan continued his work, both on his business and on himself. He made sure to stay consistent in his actions, never letting up on the progress he had started. It wasn't about grand gestures anymore. It was about being there for Olivia in the small, everyday ways that truly mattered. And then, one evening, after a long day of meetings, Ethan returned to find Olivia sitting on the couch, a book in her lap. She looked up as he entered, and for the first time in months, there was no coldness in her eyes, just a softness that made Ethan's heart skip a beat. She didn't speak at first, just gestured for him to sit beside her. As he sat down, she placed the book aside and looked at him, her gaze steady but not unkind. "You've done the work," she said softly. "And it's not perfect, but it's enough." Ethan felt a weight lift from his chest. It wasn't a declaration of full forgiveness, and it wasn't a grand gesture. But in those words, he saw the first spark of hope. Hope that, maybe, they could find their way back to something real, together. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Olivia smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "This isn't the end of the road, Ethan. But it's a start. And right now, that's all we need." For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he had a future to look forward to. He had learned the hard way that rebuilding a life wasn't about making things perfect, it was about making things real. And with Olivia by his side, he knew they could build something new, something stronger. The months after their quiet understanding marked a pivotal change for both Ethan and Olivia. They didn't rush into anything. There were no promises made under the moonlight or declarations of eternal love. There was simply progress. In the slow, steady way of healing, their relationship began to shift. Ethan had transformed in ways that no business deal could ever measure. His empire, while still significant, was no longer his primary focus. The work he put into his company wasn't for power or glory anymore. It was about building a foundation he could be proud of. He began taking active steps to reshape the industry, implementing ethical practices and focusing on sustainable growth. The ruthless, cold decisions of the past had given way to a more compassionate, transparent approach. But it wasn't just his business that was changing. Ethan's personal life, the one he had neglected for so long, was now at the forefront of his thoughts. He worked hard every day to prove to Olivia, and more importantly, to himself, that he was no longer the man he had been. Olivia, too, had begun to change. The walls she had built around her heart, the ones that had kept Ethan at a distance, slowly began to crumble. But like Ethan, she didn't rush. She watched him from a distance, her gaze sharp, always evaluating his every move. She wasn't interested in words anymore. She wanted to see real actions, real transformation. One evening, as they sat on the terrace, a warm breeze carrying the scent of jasmine through the air, Olivia looked over at Ethan. For the first time in a long while, there was no wariness in her eyes. No uncertainty, just a quiet understanding. She had seen his changes, and more importantly, she had seen the man who was willing to keep working at it. "I was wrong about you," Olivia said, her voice soft but steady. "I thought you were just playing a game, but you've been changing, and I think I can finally believe it." Ethan turned to her, his heart racing at the weight of her words. He had worked so hard to prove himself to her, and now, in this moment, her acceptance felt like the culmination of everything he had struggled with. "You don't have to believe it all at once," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise, I'm not going back to who I was. I've seen too much, done too much, to ever forget what it means to be better." Olivia smiled. Just a small curve of her lips, but it was enough to send warmth flooding through him. It was a quiet acknowledgement, but it meant everything. The next day, as Ethan prepared for an important meeting, Olivia approached him with something that caught him by surprise. She handed him a small box. It wasn't extravagant, just a simple wooden box, hand-carved with intricate patterns. "What's this?" Ethan asked, his voice curious. Olivia's smile softened. "Something to remind you that change isn't just about doing the big things. It's about the small, everyday moments." Ethan opened the box to reveal a set of delicate keys to a small house on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't the mansion he was used to. It wasn't a symbol of power or success. It was simple, peaceful, and calm. "I've been thinking," Olivia said quietly, "about us, and about the future, and I think it's time we take a step forward, together." The meaning of the gesture wasn't lost on Ethan. It wasn't just a gift. It was a symbol of trust, of her willingness to build something real with him. For the first time in a long time, Ethan realized that it wasn't the grandiose gestures or the wealth that mattered. It was the simple moments, the quiet steps they took together toward a future that was just theirs. He looked up at her, his voice full of raw emotion. "You're ready to build a real future with me?" Olivia nodded. "I think we're both ready, but we'll do it on our terms. Together. No more games." Ethan reached out, his hand finding hers. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they sat on the porch of the small house, a place that wasn't just a property, but a symbol of the new life they were beginning. There were still so many challenges ahead. The road to healing was long, and there would be moments where they stumbled. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan was no longer afraid. With Olivia by his side, he knew they could face whatever came next. "I love you," Ethan whispered, his voice full of sincerity. Olivia's eyes softened, and with a quiet smile, she replied, "I love you too, and I think this is just the beginning." And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. They had built something new, something real, and it was only the beginning. What's next for them? Only time would tell. But for the first time, Ethan wasn't afraid to find out. If this story touched your heart or made you smile, give it a big thumbs up and drop your thoughts in the comments. I can't wait to hear. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single one. Thanks for watching. You're awesome.